You are listening to the Fresh Take Network.
What it is, what it do, I'm going to Fresh Take. Joshua Adamley, I'm Arbuthnot, and I am very privileged to have today Shawnee Harlee, UFC coach, assistant coach for the Canada Olympic, and now in charge of Shawnee Harlee Winning Matters, a great business entity that she's jumped into. Shawnee, it is an absolute privilege to have you on the show today.
Let's do this. I'm ready.
So first off, just before we kind of get on the biography of everything, how has everything been for you?
No different than I think many people. You know, COVID has changed businesses. It's changed lives. It's changed sport. And, I'm no different than how it's affected everyone. And I think that's one of the great things about being a mental toughness coach is I've had to apply my teachings to myself, because COVID hasn't been easy for any of us. So I've been working on my mental toughness skills to help me manage.
Yeah, how have you, let's kind of, get to the site and everything, first of all, because it's obviously what's in the modern right now. How has the pandemic, how have you worked with the pandemic, with the mental toughness stuff, with the site?
Well, the thing that's been interesting is, for many of us, we've had to pivot, right? Like COVID has forced us to come up, using a sport analogy, we've had to come up with another game plan. The original scouting report, is no longer relevant. We've had to come up with a different game plan. And I think that's what has been great about this business of mental toughness is we're all having to come up with a different game plan. And, the athletes, coaches, parents, and leaders that I'm working with, we've all had to pivot and shift and change our mindsets in some way, shape, or form. And, the toolkit that I teach has been really helpful for me, but it's been really helpful for all of the people that I work with.
Yeah, I think, you've seen so many people struggle. I mean, the mental health side has really increased, as far as the forefront on it the past decade for sure. It's always been there, but it's been increased the past decade. And I'm sure you've seen it with players in the past and had those conversations. But during the pandemic, we saw really an increase in it and really put to the forefront of people struggling with it. You've seen so many people step out in the last, few months, few years, talking about, even before pandemic, how it really mentally was tough for them, but in this past year, how mentally it was really frustrating and tough for them.
What's been interesting for me, I've been involved in sport most of my life. And even when I was coaching, whether it was with the Olympic team, whether it was with Dinos, it was very obvious to me the mental toughness challenges that everyone had. And it wasn't just athletes.
Yeah.
It's coaches, it's parents, it's referees, it's all of us. But it just was really uncool to talk about it. I think that what we're seeing right now, the only thing that's new is that it's actually okay and acceptable to talk about it. It's always been there, but sport has taught us, never show weakness. Never let them see you sweat. Pound your chest just to show how well you're doing. And yet there's always another side because athletes are people, coaches are people. And we all have these, these emotions and these thoughts, these feelings that are going on. And now what's so great, it's like, wow, we actually get to be human beings and say, you know what, it's not always wonderful in my world. It's not always going well in my world. And I think it's a very healthy place for us to be, that it's okay to talk about our imperfections.
Well, like you talked about too, especially from the athlete world, right? Me being a former athlete, you being a coach too, like specifically in that world, it was like, just shake it off. You're being silly. Just like move on with it. And now it's so important that you see, I think when DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love spoke out, I think that was the first time that they showed athletes can be able to speak out to it. And people were very thankful for that. And that kind of started this conversation where it's like, okay, here's these two athletes. I mean, Kevin Love just came off a championship and was talking about how deeply depressed he was. And I think that opened the conversation to a lot of people being like, okay, these athletes are more than just what you see.
It's so well said. And I use the phrase, I call it the F word. In sport, we never want to talk about the F word, feelings.
Mm-hmm.
That you're not supposed to have any. Oh, no, that's not true. You can have feelings as long as they're good ones.
Yeah.
As long as they're happy ones, as long as they're confident ones. And I'm like, we need to talk about this F word because, yeah, there's the happy bucket of feelings, but there's another bucket. It's the unhappy bucket, depressed, sad, demotivated, scared, nervous, anxious. And, you know, Kevin Love and a number of other athletes have opened up this other bucket. And I think it's been relieving to many people because they're like, wow, I have this other bucket going on all of the time, but I've never been able to show it to anyone. I've never been able to talk about it, which of course increases anxiety and nerves and depression and all of those negative emotions. So the fact that we're talking about the F word, feelings, like think about how uncool that sounds
Right.
for sport, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to sit down and talk about feelings. Like that sounds so uncool, but wow, it's so cool. And this is what I get to do in my mental toughness business is I get to dive into the heart of the athletes, parents, and coaches and leaders that I'm working with. We just spend so much time in our head about what am I thinking? And I'm like, how about let's go, what are you feeling? Because that's where, in my opinion, that's where the answers are.
Oh, it's so key. I mean, not to get too dark with it, but, you know, we talked about a guy like Kevin Love or some of the athletes and people that come to you. I mean, we saw back in the middle of the 2010s here, the rash of NHL suicides from players like Wade Belak. And that was a sense of a lot of mental health problems that they, at that point, like you said, they weren't ready to release their feelings or have these conversations. And they took a really unfortunate turn. Junior Seau from the NFL was another one that his playing career was done. He didn't have anyone to talk to about these deep down feelings. Maybe CTE played a little bit of a factor in it, but there was this sense of not being able to let it out and not let people know how they're feeling. And it's so important now to have that. And what you're doing as well is such a great equalizer to let these people move on with their next set of life and release what they are feeling.
Well, you know, I'll give you an example. I work with a professional, one of my clients is a professional LPGA golfer. And so when I first start working with her, she's like, Shawnee, those 3-foot putts. I'm like, oh, the puke zone. Oh yeah, I know all about the puke zone, and I'm not a professional golfer by any stretch. She's like, when I'm standing over those putts, my hands are shaking. She said, but I didn't know if I could tell anybody. And so I said to her, I said, do you think you're the only one? She's like, well, yeah, like I'm a professional golfer. I'm like, if I went and polled all of those professional golfers who are standing over a putt in the puke zone on 18 to decide whether they're going to make or miss the cut, to decide if they miss this putt, it's going to cost them tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of. I said, you think everyone standing over those putts is calm, cool, and collected? And she's like, well, and then I said, yeah, you're right. So she hesitated. I'm like, everybody feels the puke zone, but that's what we've also taught, you know, the more high profile you are, the less problems you're supposed to have.
Yeah.
And of course you're supposed to make 3-foot putts. You're a professional golfer. I'm like, oh, heck no, that's not how it works. The puke zone is there. A basketball player, he said, this is pre-COVID. He's like, I'm on the free throw line. We're down 1 and there's 4 seconds left. And my coach yells from the bench, hey, you got this. And he's like, Shawnee, in my heart, I didn't feel like I got this.
Yeah.
He said, I wanted to pee my pants. He didn't say that. Those are my words. But I could tell those feelings.
Yeah.
And basically what he said is I didn't know what to do with the voice of self-doubt. that is almost every athlete, parent, and coach that I'm working with is, what do I do with the voice of self-doubt? Because I've been trained to not listen to it, but it doesn't shut up. I'm like, I can help you with that.
It's funny you mentioned the free throw thing, because you've seen that kind of reduced to a team. You go back to the 95 NBA finals, Nick Anderson misses those 2 free throws, right? He's not the same as a player really ever again. And it carries on to the rest of the Magic, and they lose that series. And you could tell that mentally, that just destroyed them. And it destroyed him as a player because the pressure was on.
Yes. And isn't it, what I think is interesting is I ask myself, what creates pressure?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you didn't care and the outcome didn't matter, there isn't pressure. So we think about what creates it. And again, what I'm learning so much, especially with the athletes that are at the highest level, so these LPGA golfers, and I work with a professional basketball player as well, they've learned that anything other than perfection is not acceptable. So they can't, the fact that you're standing on the free throw line and you might miss, like the thought of that is unmanageable for them, because we've put them on this pedestal. You can't miss, you're not allowed to miss. And I'm like, wow, it's a game of mistakes.
It is, yeah.
Even at the highest levels. And so then where we're going with this is, when everyone's watching, the expectations are so high. The goal is perfection, which is unattainable. Think about all of the feelings, the F word again, that bubbles up in there. And we get these nerves, anxiety, the pressure, disappointment, low self-esteem, lack of confidence. And it's everywhere in sport. And for the first time in decades, we are talking about it more than we've ever spoken. And I think that is really important.
It's so important. What kind of, making the transition that you did from coaching to this, what led to that transition for you?
It's funny, you're go along in life on this road that you picked, and you think the road is leading somewhere specific, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's a detour that I didn't see coming. And what I learned is, what I'm doing now, this is going to sound cliche and corny, but I don't care. This is what I was born and called to be doing. And my journey of being a coach, a head coach and assistant coach for over 25 years was my training for what I was really called to do, because I got to live it. I'm going to call myself, I was an athlete, pretty average one, but I'm going to still call myself an athlete.
Hey, I'm right there with you.
So, yeah, you and I.
Yeah.
I was in the trenches. I was in the grassroots. I was a coach. I saw that. I lived, breathed, and ate that world for 25 years. And that's what readied me to make this shift, because I was able to look back and I'm like, what were all the things I didn't have? What were all the things I didn't know? What were all the things I didn't see? The things I didn't feel, the things that I didn't understand. And I always quote my grandpa. When I was younger, my early days as a coach, my grandpa would say, Shawnee, so soon old, so late smart. And I'm like, Grandpa, what are you talking about, man? Like, look at me. I'm rocking it here. I'm pretty smart. And you didn't know that you weren't smart until you get older. And when I look back, I'm like, I was so not smart. And so I think, well, how can I help athletes, parents, coaches, leaders get smart quicker? Have this toolkit that I was not there when I was trying to become my best self. I didn't even really know what that word meant, because what I believe sport is lacking in our training and helping us become highly functioning human beings, not just high profile athletes, are two things: self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
True.
I don't think we have that being taught at the sport level. And so where does that leave us? So this is what my shift has been. I look back and I'm like, my self-awareness was low and my emotional intelligence was low. And when we're lacking those two things, we have a set of glasses that actually has mud on them, but we don't know it. We don't know the mud's there until the mud gets cleared away and you're like, oh my goodness, whoa, look at what it looks like now. So that's what I know that those 25 years trained me, helped me, taught me to shift to this toolkit that I call mental toughness, but the foundation of it is self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
Well, I think, you, like you said, you have all this prior experience being a coach on the Olympic level, on the collegiate level, and you were this fantastic coach on that level, but now you really transitioned to life coach, really, with the way that you're going. And like you said, you had all the tools to go to being this terrific life coach.
That's well said. And when I have these conversations, if we're talking sports specifically, there are 4 pillars for high performance. There's the technical tactical pillar. So that's your offense, your defense, your skills, and your drills. Mm-hmm. That's the pillar that coaches and athletes spend most of their time in. So the technical tactical pillar. Then there's the physical pillar: speed, agility, quickness, strength, power. We spend a lot of time in that pillar as well. But there are 2 other pillars that really get left behind. And so when I think of them as pillars, when 2 pillars are left behind, we are imbalanced. And the other 2 pillars are the social emotional pillar. So that's our ability to form and sustain positive relationships. And the way I teach it is positive relationships with those around us, but a positive relationship with yourself. And I believe the most important relationship we ever have is the relationship with ourselves. And then the 4th pillar is the mental pillar. So all the things that we would think of, like grit, resilience, mistake response, et cetera, et cetera. And when I look back, when I was an athlete, when I was a coach, when I was involved with the Olympic team, I'm like, where was all of our focus? On 2 pillars, the technical, tactical, and the physical pillar. And then I watched athletes suffering, but I'm like, come on, suck it up, princess. What are you suffering for? For me as a coach, I was suffering, but it's like, okay, just work harder, watch another game tape, improve your scouting report. So I was never, because I didn't know there was such a thing as 4 pillars. I didn't even understand that why we were imbalanced, why we were suffering, why we were having anxiety, why we were having nerves. What does choking mean? Choking happens all the time in sport. Well, why? That is the social, emotional, and the mental pillars. And that's what I'm helping people do. I'm helping athletes, parents, coaches, and leaders become more balanced. There's nothing wrong with the skill sets, getting quicker, stronger, faster. Yes, keep doing that. But we haven't addressed the person, what's going on in my head, and more importantly, what's going on in my heart. And when we can balance these 4 pillars, I believe that helps us become the best version of ourselves. And most important, it leads us to the podium of life. Yeah. Because very few athletes, parents, or coaches are going to make their living in sport. But the podium of life is forever.
It's that next jump, right? You see it during every women's or men's NCAA or U Sport championships, right? It's very few of these that, are going to go to Europe or the WNBA or the NBA. It's how are you going to succeed to that next life, or even, NCAA football or whatever. How are you going to go and succeed in the next part of life? And I think you give a service to these athletes they can go to that's very, very important for succeeding and going forward with that as well. It's not just about succeeding in sport. Like you said, it's getting those other pillars and succeeding in sport and in life. Sorry, not just in sport.
You're bang on. And, I'm going to come back to that F word, feelings. Yeah. There's, for a while now, the phrase emotional intelligence has become a very popular and important phrase. And there's a number of, when you look at any of the research, they will tell you that one of the most important qualities of great leaders is emotional intelligence. And so then I think, okay, so what's a leader? Okay, well, a president, a CEO, but a coach, a parent, those are all leaders. And then I'm like, yeah, but what about the athletes? And I'm like, well, we are all leaders because we have to lead ourselves. So in reality, we are all leaders. And if one of the most important foundations of being a great leader is emotional intelligence, but sport teaches us not to have feelings. It's such a, they bang up against each other, but now it's a shift. We're starting to shift more towards the importance of emotional intelligence. And so I say to athletes, how can you be emotionally intelligent if we don't talk about the F word? Feelings.
So true.
And, I'll work with, when I first start working with athletes, I'll say to them, I was working with a downhill ski racer, 18 years old. And one of the first questions I asked him is, I said, well, what are you most afraid of? He's like, what? I said, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. And I'm like, okay, so you go downhill at 90 kilometers an hour, but you're not afraid of anything. So because you can see an 18-year-old downhill ski racer taught is completely uncool that you might be afraid of anything. But when I actually start asking questions and we get into this F word, and what are you most afraid of? What are you most worried about? What's one thing that happens in your sport that makes you feel embarrassed? So I bring in these words of feelings, and wow, once the floodgate opens, I'm like, yes, we're human beings. Yes, we're human doings, but we're human beings, and we all have these bucket of feelings, and no one knows what to do with them. They don't know what to do with the fear, the anxiety, and so we push it away. We pretend it isn't there. And then what you resist persists. And so what I say to them, if we're going to be emotionally intelligent, my definition is we have to acknowledge, understand, and then manage our feelings and emotions. That's emotional intelligence. And what's so cool is you can see it out in the world. We're starting to talk about it.
We are
starting to become more emotionally intelligent, and it's becoming cool.
It is. I mean, I kind of laugh in some ways because it's almost like you look at some of these athletes, it must be like kind of like Sopranos, where they're Tony Soprano and you're the therapist, and they're trying to be this tough guy or girl, and then the floodgates just go and they finally release everything.
Absolutely. Like I was telling you about this professional golfer.
Yeah.
That I was working with, and that's the other thing that I'm learning about athletes. They think they're the only one feeling this way because when you're never allowed to talk about it. So it's like this code of secrecy.
Yeah.
Just be cool, just be tough. Don't show weakness. So there's this code of secrecy. And so when it's unsaid, you think that you're the only one. And then when you start talking about it, and I was talking to this LPGA golfer, I'm like, oh no, you are so normal. She's like, what? She goes, no one's ever called me normal before. She goes, thank you. What a relief that I'm normal and that I do want to puke standing over this 3-foot putt. That is a normal feeling. I'm like, oh, heck yeah. I said, now let me give you a toolkit so that you can manage when that feeling comes. And this is what we all need as athletes. Like we all need this because the feelings are there, even if it's a code of secrecy, even if we don't want them, the feelings are coming. So let's get a toolkit.
How, as you started this, what was the start of it with the athletes coming to you compared to now? Like, how did you feel like it as it started to grow?
Well, when this is kind of the other neat part is when athletes, and parents and coaches and leaders, when they come to me, what they think what they sign up for, they get way more because they're signing up because this is a code of secrecy. Mm-hmm. No, we don't even know what we've never heard of the social emotional pillar. We've never thought about, what's my relationship with myself? Like, if you think about most athletes, think about how much negative self-talk goes on with most mm-hmm. athletes. So that's the relationship they're building with themselves. We've never thought about it. So to me, we're in this level 1 of self-awareness, which is unconscious incompetence. So I don't know what I don't know. So if I don't know it, I can't do anything about it. Very common when athletes come to me, the number 1 thing they want me to help them with is confidence. That's the number 1 thing. Or parents will be like, right? I need you to work with my 12-year-old because I go and I watch his hockey games mm-hmm. and he never goes into the corner. He just stands back and he's I want you to give him more confidence. And I've been doing this quite a while now, and I know that is not the root. That's not what's really going on. If you allow me to chase a squirrel here for a moment, because I love chasing squirrels, and this one just jumped out at me.
Of course.
I don't talk about confidence when I'm working with athletes because, my opinion, confidence is an emotion based on results. It's not a personality characteristic. It's an emotion based on results. When you're playing well, you're confident. When you're not playing well, you're not confident. And I tell people, if you're not very good at something, don't ask me to help you become confident. That doesn't work because confidence and competence are connected. When you get better at something, you become more confident. So I said, I will help you, but we're not going to work on confidence. We're going to work on courage. Because, I take this teaching from Brene Brown. You can be brave and afraid at the same time. I have a number of athletes that I work with, and they're trying this new thing. And I'm like, well, how did it go in the game? Like, in the game? I've never used that in a game. And I'm like, well, why not? Well, I don't have any confidence in it. And they're like, well, I'm just going to wait until I get confident. I said, well, what if that never happens? So what I work on in mental toughness is the ability to tolerate uncomfortable feelings, the ability to tolerate discomfort and do it anyway. So we can have a feeling, but we can choose an action at the same time. I can feel afraid, uncertain about taking a shot, but I can choose courage. I can shoot even though I feel afraid. It's working. I think it is actually liberating for athletes because what they're waiting for is confidence, and what they have been taught, I can't perform well unless I feel confident. And I'm like, that's a lie. I said, I don't know who told you that, but that is not true. So I'm teaching them how to, I call it when the storm comes, because it's coming.
Yeah,
it's coming. If you don't ever want a storm, don't play sport. But life will bring you a storm anyway. So
it definitely will.
Sport brings us storms all of the time. And I teach that you cannot prepare for the storm in the storm. It's too late. So you must prepare for the storm before the storm. And that's why it's important to talk about all of the F words. When you're in the storm, what does it feel like? I feel like I want to puke. I feel nervous. I feel unconfident. I'm worried I'm going to let people down. I feel I'm going to be embarrassed. What will people say about me on social media? All of that is the storm.
That's a huge one. Yeah, that last one's a huge one.
It's so, oh my gosh.
See Kevin Durant.
It's huge. The social media piece is huge. So the toolkit allows us in the storm. I'm like, okay, here comes the storm. Put your life jacket on and start swimming because you know how to swim. I've already taught you how to swim. There's your toolkit. You don't give swimming lessons to someone who's drowning. It's too late. They had to learn to swim before that. And that's what, I mean, I like when I talk about this, I just feel my heart rate increasing because I'm so passionate about it.
No, I was going to say, like, I can feel the passion from you. And I don't know how much, you look at someone like Kia Nurse, I'm sure you had somewhat of an impact on her. And that's someone I feel like has handled her broadcast side, her playing side, and her social media side really well. And I'm sure you had somewhat of an influence on her, and you're having an influence on these other athletes.
Kia, I don't know if I did or didn't, but I will tell you that Kia has a toolkit that is world class, in this area. She's a high performer, the way that she manages herself. But I'll tell you that woman has been through a lot of storms, and you get experience too, right? You get better at the storms when you figure out how to handle them. And that woman has been through many, many, many storms. And when we see how well she handles them, she almost seems unflappable.
Yeah.
But that isn't by accident.
I'm sure it's not. I mean,
by design.
And much like, you've had success with Kia and other WNBA players, which we'll talk to in a bit. But I think the exciting thing about this for you is you're not just focused on just women's basketball players now. You get to watch these other athletes grow into potential pros or just into life. And that's got to be the really exciting thing, is where before you'd watch women graduate from the UFC and go on and succeed in their life, or you see the Olympians go on and grow. Now you have LGBT golfers, downhill skiers, all these other athletes that you're pushing into life and getting the root for them in all these different avenues.
Well, isn't self-awareness and emotional intelligence is a life skill, right? And that's what's so cool. I'm using sport as the context because sport, I just believe, is a wonderful teacher for us. But whether people finish their sport in grade 10 or whether they go on to become a professional athlete, these tools of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, they carry over for our entire life to every context. And, I keep thinking of how much we glorify it. And we glorify these athletes as they're these superhero. Look at Kia Nurse. Mm-hmm. You'd watch Kia Nurse and think she's never had a tough day in her life. She's never felt nervous in her. I'm like, oh, that's not true. But we don't see it because we glorify them. They're on this pedestal. I work with an athlete on our national ski jumping team. She's 17 years old, and I'm like, who voluntarily throws themselves off the side of a mountain and hopes to land safely? Who does that?
Yeah.
Come on, people. So where I'm going with this is the glorification, and yet in many sports with athletes I work with, the danger is real. The danger in ski jumping is real. I work with freestyle skiers. I'm watching them flip 30, 20 feet in the air doing 780 upside down backward rodeo switch 500s. I have to make the name up. And I'm like, oh my goodness, there is some real danger in what our athletes are doing. But again, the glorification, we make it seem, well, that wasn't that hard. They aren't having real life problems. And I'm like, oh yes, they are. They are human beings. They are normal, just like all of us.
So I love everything with this, and you have a really cool initiative, but I think we'll save that for the end just so that we can make that stick, because the initiative that you just came up with is really cool. So let's kind of get to the biography side, but I love everything with the Winning Matters, and I love the passion that you have for it. You added the passion to me with it as well. But let's kind of go all the way back to your playing days a little bit and just kind of talk about I guess, first of all, where did your passion for basketball really start?
I was involved in sports for as long as I can remember. My dad was a phys ed teacher, and that obviously helped. And my mom was not an athlete in any way, shape, or form, which didn't matter. It didn't matter. Parents can be so supportive of their kids getting involved in sports, even if they're not athletes. So my dad was the impetus because he had been an athlete, but my mom was just as important in that journey for me. And so I just played all sports. I grew up in a small town. I went to a 1A school and played all of the sports. I just loved basketball the best. I don't know why I chose basketball. I'm like 5'5" with my runners on. Anyway, and I chose basketball, and like many small town athletes, we're the best athlete in our school. And so we think we're ready for the Olympic team. And I actually wrote in my high school yearbook that I wanted to play basketball for Canada at the Olympics. And I love it. I was obviously dreaming big, even though I was a very small fish in a big pond. And that was in Campbell. I grew up in Campbell River on the island. And so it was an obvious choice for me to go to UVic. And it's funny when you're younger, you just don't know what you don't know. And so UVic seemed like the obvious choice for me to reach my Olympic goals. And the year that I was coming out of high school, UVic had just won a national championship under the great Kathy Shields. And I'm like, well, that's obviously the program for me. Long story short, I wasn't very good at the real level where, I was just a small fish. And I played at UVic. I played there for 3 years. I made it as a walk-on, and I look back at it and I think Kathy Shields just felt sorry for me. I am not sure, but she kept me as a walk-on. Then she cut me. Then I disliked her for a long time. But as I got wiser, she gave me a great gift. She cut me, which basically said, Shawnee, you're not good enough as an athlete, but I think you might make a really good coach. And she was the one that shifted, gave me a big detour. And she got me into coaching. And wouldn't you know, I went to the Olympics, but not in the way that I wrote in my yearbook.
There's something in the water there in Victoria. I keep on talking to basketball people. Steve Nash comes from there. And there's a handful of other basketball people I've talked to, but there's something in the water there at Vic that's bringing out the best of some of the basketball people that we've had. I mean, Steve Nash, obviously, being an assistant Olympic coach, and I could go with others, but something in the water there in Victoria.
Well, there was certainly, the Ken and Kathy Shields dynasty, was alive and well for many, many, many years there. And as we know, winning attracts winning. And once you get that dynasty set, it's not hard to attract great athletes that help that program keep winning. But, I got to be part of that for a while in that heyday. I was definitely, when I say a part of it, I want to be real. I was a 30-30 player. I played when we were up 30 or when we were down 30. So, that was the part of it that I got. But you know what? We forget that sometimes when we don't get what we want, it's called experience.
Yeah.
And there were big parts of my UVic thing that I was really mad at because I didn't get what I wanted. And yet I couldn't have gotten where I was going if I hadn't have not gotten what I wanted, if that made sense right there.
Yeah.
That I think that there's some just great learnings. And I also think it's a mental toughness skill of resilience to say, okay, this door closed. This didn't work out the way I wanted. Now what? What's next? And UVic, Kathy Shields, that whole environment, it was an environment of unbelievable excellence that served me so well, even as a 30-30 player.
Well, and the legacy is carried on. I was interested too, because I don't know if you're not around, I guess around Victoria during Steve Nash kind of growing up, so you probably don't really have any interaction with Steve Nash at that point.
He was around, like that was, I'm a little older and obviously much wiser than Steve Nash. Oh, I'm older and wiser. He was a little bit after me. But you know, he was a huge, well, everyone still talks about, you know, everyone knows Steve Nash because he went to high school on the island.
Yeah. And you've both been a part of Team Canada. So then you go there in 94. How did that come and what was that experience like in 94?
You know, again, it's the reason that I went to the Olympics in 94 was because of Kathy Shields, who cut me, and then who I was mad at. And if there would have been social media back in the day, I would have unfriended her. We didn't even have social media back then. But remember, I'd said that she cut me, and then she got me going in the direction that I was meant to go on, which was to coach. And so I was able to join that staff as an apprentice coach because I was just in the process of becoming a career coach at the time. And Kathy Shields was the head coach of the national team at that time. And she stepped down just before the Olympics in 94. And then a new head coach came, and that new head coach decided to keep me on in the staff. And that was my first experience at the national level with our team. And then we were at the Olympics in Atlanta in 1996.
Yeah. What was that experience like? I mean, really going and being an Olympic coach at that point and being in Atlanta.
Oh, it was one of the most eye-opening. You talk about feeling like a small fish in a big pond. Canada hadn't qualified for the Olympics for, I don't remember how many years it had been since Canada had qualified. So the fact that we were even there was a humongous victory. You know, we struggled from a competitive perspective, but again, it opened my eyes to, oh, this is what the best basketball players in the world look like. Oh, this is what the best coaches in the world, what they're doing. It just, again, it exposed me to excellence, but now one level higher. And that was, again, the learning for me was just fantastic. And I'll tell you, it made me hungrier than ever. Like I wanted more. I'm like, wow, I don't know anything. Like, and I really need to smarten up here. And it really made me hungry to learn and gather more and become better at my craft.
Just kind of aside, during the Atlanta Olympics, there's the bombing there, kind of what your experience was during that day.
It was, you know, it was very scary. Thankfully, we were all back in the dorms at that time, but we all got a knock on our door, because remember, there were no cell phones.
No.
Back in that time, there was none. So it was like big knocks on our door, and everybody is like, get into the hallway right now. And so we had to do a head count just to make sure that, you know, all of our team, our staff, that everyone was actually there and accounted for. But it certainly changed things for I mean, you know, back in the day, that was really scary, and no cell phones. So security just increased by a million. It felt like after that, and it became, I could feel the reality of, oh yeah, this isn't just the fun, happy Olympics where I get to come and experience. It's like, oh no, there's some real life stuff going down here. And it certainly did bring some a reality check to all of us.
Absolutely. So we'll get to UFC. We'll just kind of focus on Canada right now, but what's the overarching experience been like being part of Team Canada, and what's the evolution of the program been for you?
You know, again, you will look at the evolution of basketball in our country, you know, the overarching. I just think our women's program, obviously that's my bias. I look at, you know, how far it has come. You know, right now our women's team is ranked 4th in the world. 4th. Come on, people.
It's amazing.
You know that? And I can't, because I got to be part of that journey, I just can't tell you how hard it is to get to 4th. You know, when I first started with the program, that was in 2013. That was after Alison McNeil had they went to the London Olympics. And that's when Canada really started to rise after that London Olympics. Then Lisa Tomaitis took over in 2013, and I joined her staff in 2013. And I think we were maybe 11th in the world. I don't know. It was something.
It really felt like you guys were going to medal. It really did.
Oh, yes. And now here they are, 4th in the world. Like that jump, like that is a colossal jump. Yeah. And I can't tell you how hard it is, because there are so many great teams. There are so many great programs. And it's a testament to Canada basketball, to what the leaders are doing with Canada basketball, the resources that are becoming available, our coach education. And really you have to look at, you know, Alison McNeil is the one, like I'm most familiar with that era. And then coming into the Lisa Tomaitis era, you want to talk about, you know, I talked about that technical tactical pillar. You want to talk about the best in the world in the technical tactical pillar. Talk about the physical pillar. I believe when we were in Rio, I believe that we were the fittest, strongest team there. So we have some wonderful, unbelievably skilled experts leading this program. It's not an accident that Canada has become 4th in the world. Then also think about this, you know, this evolution, say over 10 years, we're getting ready to go into a 3rd Olympics. So that would be, say, 12 years. There's something happening in our development program, right? Think about all the grassroots, and that's Canada basketball. That has been intentional. They have been developing this program so that by the time people get to our national team level, it's not like we were in 96 where we were just happy to be there. It's like, oh no, we're not happy to be here anymore. We have the talent to compete with the best in the world. I just think that's fantastic.
Oh, it is. And like you said, I don't think you're being biased. The women have been ahead of the men are finally they're getting their stuff together, and they have super talented athletes, but the women have been ahead of the men for the longest time. And like I said, almost in 2016, very close to medaling at one point, as you well know. And I'm sure he's still heartbroken about not getting at least even that bronze.
Oh, wow. I haven't gone back there for a while, but as soon as I went back there, I can feel the emotion of, you know, it's the phrase from the old show I used to watch back in the day, the Wide World of Sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And the agony was the deepest that I've ever felt in my sporting life, was that disappointment in Rio.
I bet. And I mean, it's so interesting. I'm watching it, and I'm obviously going for Team Canada, but then I see you in the huddle. I'm like, oh, it's Shawnee. And, you know, those that don't know, our family has a connection to you. You recruited my sister at one point, and still a lot of love and respect there. So it's like, oh, like I want Canada to win, but I really want Shawnee to win. Like I'd be so happy for her. Like, it's really cool to watch that, but then seeing you in the huddle and everything like that. And it was just that to me, I'm not trying to, you know, sucker you up that I haven't in the podcast. I'm like, oh, I really hope that Shawnee can have this on her mantle to at least have that medal.
But, you know, I'm, as my grandpa said, maybe I'm a little wiser now that I'm older. I've really learned that medals are very, very elusive. And the disappointment for me was less about the medal and more about you just, you want to be able to show up as your best self, as a team, as a coach. And that's what sport, why it brings us agony, is that, sometimes things just don't go your way. Sometimes you don't show up as your best self. Sometimes you get the exact shot that you want by the exact person that you want taking the shot. And this happened to us in the game against France in the last 2 minutes, and the ball doesn't go in.
No.
And, I'm more realistic about that now as I'm older, that sport is a gamble, right? Sport is a gamble. And that means the outcome is always uncertain. And that's the agony for me, is I'm like, dang it, why couldn't we have lost by like 25?
That's always the case, right?
Because then it wouldn't feel so agonizing. But we were right there. We got the shot we wanted by the person we wanted taking the shot. The game plan was solid. But that's how sport goes. And would it have been great to play for a medal? Absolutely. Was the devastation real? Those were the darkest days of my coaching career, hands down, times a million. Mm-hmm. And again, when you don't get what you want, it's called experience.
Well, and that's the thing, you look at that team, and fingers crossed as we're recording, the Olympics are still going to happen, because you said this women's team is fourth ranked in the world, have a real chance to actually medal in this upcoming Olympics. And I think you take that heartbreak, you learn from that experience, and I think it's going to grow this women team going forward into 2021 Olympics here.
You said something that's really important, is what did we learn from the disappointments? Mm-hmm. Again, I'm coming back into the mental toughness again.
You got to do it, yeah.
And I can't help it, because it's just there. Yeah. After Rio, when we look back, it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do in this next quadrennial? What do we need to address? And we looked at the 4 pillars, and it was we're not lacking technically, tactically, we're certainly not lacking physically, but we did look at those other 2 pillars, and we did see an imbalance. And you know what the cool thing was, is after Rio, Canada Basketball hired a full-time mental performance coach.
That's
because
awesome.
They're like, we're good technically, tactically, we are great physically. Let's balance these other 2 pillars. And his name is Bryce Tully, and he's been with them for this quadrennial. And I can tell you for sure what an important contribution he's made to help these athletes coming in to Tokyo, on the biggest day, the biggest game, the biggest stage of their life, show up as their best self. We weren't able to do that in Rio, but I really think they're going to be able to do it in Tokyo. And it still doesn't guarantee anything.
No.
That's what's so frustrating.
Yeah. And the really exciting thing is too, you talk about this kind of evolution of Canada basketball. It's not just that, it's the evolution of women's basketball. I think we're seeing women's basketball at the best ever. I mean, it's a dirty little secret, but it's not really, going back to, unfortunately, Kia losing it, but that Notre Dame game at the buzzer, it's kind of been the better Final Four for the last 3-4 years. The women's Final Four has been better than the men's, and the women's game is starting to grow, and it shouldn't have the word respect, but unfortunately that word is there, that it's getting more respect, and you're seeing the talent grow and grow and grow.
Without a doubt. And, talking about the WNBA, this is their 25-year, this is a big year for them, right?
It is.
I can remember when I first started watching the WNBA. I can even remember 10 years ago watching the WNBA, and I was watching the game last night when Sabrina hits the winning shot, and I'm like, look at this talent compared to when I remember watching 5 years ago, and I'm like, wow, we have a ways to go. But my goodness, the proof is right there. All you got to do is watch a game. The skill set, the individual skill set is phenomenal. The coaching. And I really think that we have been able to, you can see it's similar to what's happening in the NBA, where we're starting to get the European influence, right? We're getting Australia players are coming in, Europeans are coming in, and we're starting to see this. So it's the FIBA game as opposed to the NC2A.
Which is what the NC women is doing more than the men a little bit. They're doing a little bit more FIBA, which I think is helping their game.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So if you look at the best teams in the world, what style are they playing? It's the FIBA game, the FIBA style, and that's coming into our North American game. It's certainly coming into the WNBA. It's also coming into youth sport, and that European, Australian influence, I think, has been really, really good for us. And we're going to get a chance to see that when the Olympics come. Everyone is playing that FIBA style, and it's for a reason.
And I think that's going to be something that the American teams are super talented, don't get me why, but all these other teams are playing by the FIBA rules. And I think that's something that's it helps teams like Canada, the Aussies, and so on going into these Olympic Games, that they've been playing under the FIBA rules all these times. And some Americans, especially on the men's side, haven't been used to those rules. Basketball is still basketball, you can say, but there is a difference in games.
The FIBA game and the NC2A game are vastly different. Yep. And I think it's one thing that Canada, I only speak for the women's side, I think it's one thing that has helped Canada rise to fourth in the world, is they're like, okay, what are the best teams in the world doing that we're not? And, our head coaches have said, wow, we have to be more FIBA-like. We have to have fours that can knock down threes. We have to have fives that can pick and pop and be a threat from there. So our leaders, at Canada Basketball, credit to them, have taken our women's team into this FIBA style of play, and that's helped us catch and surpass some of the other countries in the world that were historically ahead of us.
Absolutely. And I guess just the last thing too, which is on the women's side, it must just really warm your heart just to see this evolution for the girls, to see Sabrina or Ellen Deladon or Kia in that side. And also not just to see the talent, but I think what they did during the bubble and what they've been doing outside with social justice and talking about mental health, the women in the WNBA have been better than any sport about taking that on.
There's so many things changing in our world, isn't there? We talked about it's now okay to talk about mental health. It's now okay to talk about Black Lives Matter. It's now okay to talk about the Me Too movement. I mean, I just think about how many things are all happening, in our world. Then you add COVID in there. I think it's wonderful that we know that high profile sports can influence our thinking. They can influence the media. They can influence many things. And the WNBA has figured that out. They're like, we matter. And we have a platform here where we can influence some social change. And boy, did they ever embrace it. And didn't they do it well? I was listening to some of these WNBA women speaking, before games with the mic, talking about Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, wow, they're poised. They're well-spoken. They're knowledgeable. And I'm like, this is what we need. And they have people are listening to them.
It's phenomenal. Even hearing, like a couple like Sue Bird and Raponi getting to talk about stuff, and people really care when they do talk about it. It's phenomenal.
I think they do a good job of talking about it in a way that is palatable. They don't talk about it in a way where it shoves it down your throat.
No.
They talk about it in a way that's conversational, in a way that makes you think, in a way that makes you pay attention. And I guess I said this word already, but they've got poise, professionalism. And I think that is a really powerful way to deliver a message.
And it's influence to the men. I think everything they've done that led the NBA men to having to stick up. I know the Bucks had that whole sit out, and that's great they did that, but the WNBA women were way ahead of them and all that stuff.
Right.
Okay, let's go back to UFC now. How did the Nhl job come about?
boy, I got to way back in my memory bank. Right. After I finished, I was an assistant coach at UVic, and I'm like, okay, like it's time for me to become a head coach. So I coached at Brandon for 2 years. That was my first head coaching job.
Nice.
And again, wonderful experience. Everyone told me not to take the job because the team was 0-64 in the 3 previous years. And they're like, you should never go there because you're going to get labeled a loser and you'll never get out of there. And I went anyway. And it was the best thing that I ever did because I had just finished coaching at UVic. We had an undefeated season all the way to the national championship. We had so much talent. I'd be like, roll the ball out. They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So then I go to Brandon, 0-64. And everything that I just spent the last 3 years learning with Kathy Shields and the National Coaching Institute, when you don't have talent, guess what? It doesn't work. Hello? So it was so good for me. I had to blow everything up and figure out how to win with not very much talent. And then the Calgary job came up 2 years after I interviewed, and they took a chance on me. And I was at Calgary for 18 years. And again, I didn't know where it brought me to where I am now. But of course I didn't know that when I was in it. But that's how I got the Calgary job, is I started first at Brandon.
The Brandon thing too, you kind of talk about being 0-64, but that's, again, like I was saying, the mental toughness was kicking in even earlier in your stage of your coaching career in life, going into a situation like that.
You're bang on, because how do we don't grow mental toughness when it's bright and sunny and the lake is calm. We don't grow mental toughness there.
No.
We grow it in the storms. And Brandon, oh my gosh, yep. Brandon brought me many, many storms that I am eternally grateful for.
With the Dinos, unfortunately, never won a national championship there, but your legacy still carries on for the coaching side there, still to today. What were some of your favorite highlights there?
Wow, first of all, Calgary's a great sporting city. Secondly, the facilities at that university are, when I was coaching there, they were some of the best in the country because they had the 88 Olympics.
Yep.
So the facility, it was a fantastic place to work in a fantastic city. Many highlights. I would say one of my favorites, jeepers, and I don't even know what year it was, but we won a Canada West title. That was in the days of Leanne Doan. And, we had some pretty great athletes, some really big talent. But what was really cool about that Canada West championship was we had to go back to UVic. So Kathy Shields is still coaching there. So she's my mentor.
First mentee.
I coached with her. I played with her, for her. So we're going back to the UVic gym. Nobody wins in that gym. It's the biggest home court advantage I've ever seen in my life. And so we have to go back there for Canada West championships to play a best of 3. And I remember it to this day. They let fans come in. This would never be allowed in this day and age. That's what's so cool when you talk about the good old days.
Yeah.
They let fans in with 2x4s, but the 2x4s were say 8 inches long, and they used them as bangers. So they were these pieces of 2x4s. They've had garbage can lids. It was the perfect environment for a rivalry. And long story short, we ended up winning that championship. But I remembered the feeling after it was, I felt super happy, but I also was like, wow, that's my mentor. That's my friend. And I could feel her loss. So it was that feeling of, I was kind of happy, sad
Yeah.
at the same time, because I understood the significance of, we had just won in a gym where no one wins. We had just beaten a team coached by a legend who was my mentor. And so that was really significant for me, to be able to win, but also to have a feeling of humility with it, of I'm only here because of this woman who's head coaching on the other bench. That was pretty significant for me.
I would imagine so. Like I said, the mentor versus the mentee, right? And you always kind of want to be like, I've made a full circle. Here's all the lessons you've taught me. Now I'm going to use them to beat you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What was the recruiting process like for you? I mean, at Brandon, it must have been far different than when you went to UFC.
Well, recruiting, it doesn't matter where you are. Recruiting is really difficult.
Yeah.
And when I was at Calgary, particularly in the early days, it wasn't this big league that we have now, right? There were only six teams, 8 teams. It was small. Like, if you think there, everyone was good. It wasn't just, Calgary was good. Alberta was good. UVic was good. UBC was good. Winnipeg, like, it was really tough. So recruiting, I've always found recruiting difficult. And, what I learned was, you just have to find the right flavor of ice cream. And then you have to be able to serve it to somebody that likes that flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone likes your flavor of ice cream.
Yeah.
And I had to learn what flavor was I serving, and how to find the people that were the right fit for that flavor of ice cream. And, I was certainly lacking self-awareness and emotional intelligence back then, and I was highly driven. And so I really wanted, when I recruited, I think you kind of recruit people that are like you. I didn't know that, but that's what I think I did. I wanted people that were driven, that were self-motivated, that were not afraid of coming in and working their butts off every day. And not everybody that I recruited wanted that flavor of ice cream.
Yeah.
So that was the hard part. But I still think it doesn't matter where you are, recruiting is really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, you have to kind of convince someone to, like you said, take that flavor ice cream, and why our school is superior for your ability than other school. It's always been very interesting to me, the recruiting process.
And then how do you do it with, I remembered when I was doing it, I always said that I would always recruit with the utmost integrity, and I would always speak the truth. And that sometimes didn't work in my favor. I can remember one of my lines was, because people would always ask about playing time. And I would always say, if you want a lot of playing time, go to a bad program.
Well,
because that's the truth.
Well, not to take shots, but as a SAIT play-by-play guy, I have seen some of those Dino women that went to SAIT and got that playing time. Not to take shots at certain girls, but I had seen that they weren't getting the playing time with your program, and they went to SAIT or other schools and took that playing time.
And I don't think that that's a bad thing, because
No,
I think one of the things that makes people happy is playing time.
Yep.
And so what I always said to people, if you want a lot of playing time in your first year, don't come here.
No.
Because if you're already better than my 3rd year, 4th year, or 5th year players, we aren't that good. And so I always spoke the truth. And I learned that people didn't always want to hear the truth, and neither did their parents. And that's okay. But I always spoke the truth.
you kind of hit on it. It's this thing that you have when you're a high school player. You think you're the best from your city or whatever, and then you go to the college and it's like, oh, there's everybody else here that was the best or at worst second best where they came from all of a sudden, but you still think you're the best, and you have third year players that are the best as well, and you're competing with all of them.
You're right. And so what I did instead of I'm like, I want to under promise and over deliver rather than over promise and under deliver. And, at times that formula worked for me, at other times it didn't. But my Brandon years prepared me for pretty much any roster. I learned how to make pretty good mousetraps. And
one thing that's, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, one thing that's so interesting is because of the pandemic, this recruiting class coming up is like a super class in many ways, right? You're getting kind of the recruits you had from this past year, but then you're getting the recruits that are coming up this year. But on top of that, you're getting girls that didn't play grade 12 basketball. So you have to kind of evaluate, because there'd always be maybe one or two girls that take their game to the next level in grade 12, right? But instead now you have this giant combination of these two classes, and you're not sure where the talent is or where it could have grown because some girls didn't get to make that leap. It's a very interesting side of recruiting coming up here.
That's why coaching is so hard. That's why I have so much respect, particularly at the youth sport and the CCAA level. There are so many programs now. There's so many teams. There's so many choices for players. And it's really difficult as a coach. You have to take all of these ingredients and figure out how to make the perfect pot of chili, or the perfect salad with all of these ingredients that are so varied, different skill sets, different levels, different backgrounds, it's really darn hard to be a coach and to put all of these moving pieces together and to figure out how to win, and then how to balance all four pillars. When you're under-resourced, understaffed, you never have enough money, you never have enough time, but the expectation is get out there and win. It's I just have much respect and empathy for coaches.
So as we get kind of close to wrapping up here, we have like all your great stuff going down here. Is there an opportunity that you would jump back into coaching, or you're very happy with where you are right now?
Whew. I really enjoyed my role as an assistant coach with the Olympic team. I was a head coach for 20 years. And I just said how hard it is. I just said how hard it is. I'm like, well, why would I go back and do that? I'm like, oh, right. I probably wouldn't. I don't know. I think it's a good philosophy in life to always say maybe, because you don't know what you're going to feel like a year from now. You don't know what is going to be out there. I know that I love working with people. I love serving. I love challenging myself. I love solving problems, and I really love winning. Mm-hmm. So my answer is maybe.
And my last question, because I know we're a little short on time here, is you have a really cool new initiative that you put into your website. So I just wanted you to let people know about that.
Yes, if listeners want to find out more, my website is ShawneeHarlee.com, and I just posted yesterday a tab that's called Free Resources, and if you go under there, you can download a PDF that I put together, 3 steps to mental toughness, just to get people started in these other pillars that are underexplored.
Awesome. Everyone, you can follow us at the Fresh Take 42 on Instagram and Twitter. Shawnee, this was an absolute privilege to have you on. A fantastic conversation. And until next time, everyone, cheers and enjoy the day, people.